Thank you very much, Jenny. Now then, I need to go out of this show and into my show. I'll start the paddle when you need him.
Yes, yeah.
That's okay, as long as you're near me, I don't mind. It's not that one actually, surprisingly enough. It's this one. Just to say, we're going to be doing a voice recording of all the different talks this afternoon as well. Just check that's checking why it's not working. That's okay. We'll take it from here. So, very good afternoon to each and every one of you. Let me get this voice recorder working properly. Fantastic. My voice recorder's battery's just run out, so it's going to be a great afternoon if things like happen like this. Notice when things most go wrong, it's normally a great time. Okay. So, a very good afternoon to each and every one of you. Great to be with you. Hopefully you can see the screen from the back. The theme of our sort of mini seminar this afternoon is finding meaning in a time of despair. So clearly there's very, very different reasons that have brought each and every one of you here today. I chose the title of Finding Meaning Beyond Government Abuse. Perhaps an unusual title. I'd also like to just give you a bit of a trigger warning that I'm going to be covering some sensitive topics this afternoon. And one of the things that's happened to us in the last couple of years is we've been assaulted, I don't think that's too strong a word, with lots of different ways in which we've had to just submit. And for the most part, we've lost our voices. And we've learned what it is just to shut up and get on with it. And I'm saying to you, that's not what the human being was created for. We were created with a voice to have a voice. So if something triggers you, what I share with you this afternoon, I really want you to speak up. Come and knock on my head as long as you have to, if you need the help afterwards. We'll try and make sure that you get what you need. Why me? Why this topic? This is me as an 8-year-old. You're supposed to go. Okay, don't bother. That's fine. Gosh, I'm as orange as the screen and the poster. Anyway, there we are. Why me? Why this topic? I was sexually abused just about every week over a 3-year period by a primary school teacher. I was also, if I wasn't being sexually abused at school, I was being sexually abused then at home by a friend of the family. And I learned what it was to shut up and just get on with what was happening around me. I didn't have anybody to tell. I didn't know in a sense until I was right in the midst of the situation that maybe something wasn't quite right. That led me at the age of 10 into a situation where I was group raped. As I said, there was going to be some strong stuff today. I only came to a realisation of this about 6 years ago, in my late 40s. I'm that old now. But I say that, it took me 37, 38 years to really be able to deal with the impact of what had happened to me, even as a 10-year-old. My life was such a mess by my teenage years that I got raped at the age of 16, then at 17, at 18. On every occasion I said no, and my no was ignored. That impacted me deeply. I stand here today, I can talk about these things without shame, and that's why I want to talk about what it's like to live beyond abuse, and particularly beyond government abuse. Today I run something called the Survivor Support Network here in WA for people who've experienced childhood sexual abuse. That means I'm involved, for the most part, most days I'm doing one-on-one work and group work with different survivors. I want to tell you my phone is fine. Don't put your foot on it. But I just want to say that freedom is very, very real. And freedom is something that a lot of people these days aren't particularly feeling as a result of some of the decisions that both our federal and state governments have been making. And I do all this work under the title of a peer support network called True Identity. You might hear some of that later. Now this might be a really weird first slide to give you. This is my wardrobe. I took this morning. I'm not big into selfies, but I took it to show that I do own some nice shirts and some nice ties. But I chose to come here today in a pair of short dress pants, if you like, and a short shirt, because what happened is for many years I couldn't wear long shirts. So I couldn't wear shorts and t-shirts because I was so dissociated from my body, and I had such gender dysmorphia as a result of the abuse that had happened in my life. But today I have the freedom to realise I don't have to comply with what you might want me to look like. I'm able to live in my skin, and I'm able to be me, and I'm able to have a voice while being respectful of you and respectful of myself. And I'm deliberately saying this because I think for the most part many people have lost a vision of who they are, of what it means to be human today. This next image is the fact that I did a bit of a recce before I was giving this talk, and I'm saying, so what has been crossing my pathway in the last 6 months, year or so? Particularly men crossed my pathway. Guys in the construction industry who said I had both jabs. I really regret it. There's people there who said I didn't have any jabs, and they pulled my job and they pulled this away from me. I'm struggling with PTSD. I've got deep stress. My mental health is going to the dogs. Whatever the circumstances of your life, this last 2 years have been absolutely nothing short of crippling for all of us in some way or other, whether we want to admit that or not. And actually getting real and being honest about what's going on is really, really important for you. There are 6 stages to grooming. I haven't got time to go into detail today, but I'm going to do a really quick look through this. First of all, a victim has to be found in the first place. Then what happens is the victim's trust has to be gained. Thirdly, what happens is the groomer has to fulfill a need to that victim. Then what happens is the groomer will isolate the intended victim to dominate their relationship. Clearly in childhood sexual abuse it's sexualizing it, but ultimately it's a power game even more than the sexual game. And finally what happens is the groomer wants to maintain control. So let's take a look a little bit about what's been happening to us. And this is the question I want us to ask today. Has Western Australian state government groomed citizens with the goal to maintain control? Now before you answer it, and most of you have already answered it, I know what you like me. Let's go through this a little bit. Targeting the victim. Well, what happens in childhood sexual abuse is this. The offender targets a victim because they size up, how vulnerable is this child? What's their emotional neediness? Can I get them to become isolated? Have they got any self-confidence, or will they rely on me? Children with less parental oversight are more desirable prey. I think in a time of COVID-19, this is what's been happening. My assessment, very short. The government's targeted its citizens by sizing up their vulnerability. Their dependence on health, everyone wants to be healthy. On income, we all need income, and being kept safe. Citizens with less political oversight are more desirable prey. They just are. How else have we been targeted? These are important questions that we need to ask as we advance our society forward, if we want to do that. Because of time, I'm going to rush on a little bit. What I'm saying is that me and you, we're that WA citizen. If we're not careful, we have become and been, or still are, the target of grooming. Then there's number 2, is gaining the victim's trust. What happens in childhood sexual abuse is the sex offender would gain trust by watching and gathering information. They know what this vulnerable child's needs are and how to fulfill them for them. They generate warm attention. I'm on your side. It's going to be okay. It's all good. We're here to keep you strong and safe. A suave sex offender will push and poke to try and find out more information without revealing their true intent. They're on the prowl a bit like a spy, and everything becomes pretty secretive. What's happening in COVID-19? The government's been gathering information, whether it's a QR code, whether it's sign in here, whatever it might be. Sign up for your furlough payments. Then we've got all the details of what you earn and what you're doing and where you're going and everything else. And they've been playing off our safety, promising to protect our health and to protect our income. Well, no offence, that was their job in the first place. That's what we pay them for, strong and safe, strong and safe. And yet there's been very little, if any, accountability for the decisions they've made and how they've come to those decisions. I'm very grateful to have read about Nick Goiran turning around in Parliament saying, hey, hang on a minute, we want to know how you arrived at the decisions you arrived at over these last couple of years. And we need to back any politician that turns around and isn't frightened to turn around and say, we don't want secrets anymore, because everything has been secretive. And we were told that the vaccines will stop everybody from dying. Remember that bit? So how did the government gain our trust? How did the government gain your trust? I love it, they didn't. You say that, but you'd be surprised how much they might have actually taken. Quite seriously. What's happened then is we got slowly blinded. We couldn't see what was happening. And before you know it, the Nuremberg Code, it took long enough for this even to rise up in the midst of the last couple of years. People say, hang on a minute, something's not right here. But we do know no government can mandate or force medical treatment without individual consent. And it should have been full knowledge, which people didn't have, still don't have. That brings on to stage number 3, filling a need. What happens in childhood sexual abuse is this. Again, very simply put, I could talk on this all week. Once the offender begins to fill the child's needs, the offender, be it a she or a he, may take on more importance in that child's life and may become idealized. There becomes gifts, there becomes extra attention. Affection can distinguish one adult in particular, raising concern and vigilance towards that other adult. What happens in COVID-19? Well, the messaging I believe we were told is this: only we, the government, have the full information to keep you safe. Ignore the conspiracy theorists. And we will update you every day about COVID, 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 COVID. You will see and you will hear only us. How did they try and fill a need while they were slowly deafening you en route to any other message? That's all we were hearing. Number 4, isolating the intended victim, or in our case, maybe victims. Childhood sexual abuse, the offender uses this special relationship that's developed with the victim to create situations where they're just alone together. So isolation reinforces that special connection, and the offender cultivates a sense that the victim is loved in a way that not even their family or their school could provide. It's basically me and you, says the offender. The COVID-19 situation, lockdowns. You're stuck in your house until the government tells you you can leave your house. No, you can't go to school, kids. You can't go to work, adults. You can't go and see your family when you want to, even if they're in the nursing home and they're dying days, or they're lying in bed about to die in a hospital. Sorry. We were drawn towards a daily government output, being told where you can and you can't go, who you can, who you can't meet, and you obey what we tell you was the message, and nobody else can do that. Otherwise, there are serious consequences, with crazy fines and threats even of imprisonment. How did the government isolate us? Took away our voice and the ability to speak up and say, this is my mother, I'm going to the nursing home and I'm going to see her in her dying days. There's too many weary stories, pain-filled stories. Number 5, for the sake of time, rushing through this, I'm sorry. This is about dominating the relationship. In abuse, emotional dependence and trust, once they've been gained, the offender can dominate that relationship. This is about power. It's about desensitization to talking, constant talking about something, or talking about different issues, your safety, your safety, your safety. Different pictures that we're shown. It could be long pictures of people stood in queues outside of hospitals to get their jab, whatever it might be. Or the woeful situation of this very, very stupid, unvaxxed people who are causing us all to die if we're not careful. Creating situations for the childhood abuse victim, like swimming, where the offender, the victim, might end up in a situation where they're naked. So natural curiosity is basically played upon. That's what goes on. And the grooming offender shapes the child's preferences, in the case of abuse, sexual preferences, and manipulates what they find exciting. So the child comes to see him or herself as more of a sexual being, defining the relationship with the offender in more sexual or dominant and very special terms. Again, tough stuff for us to talk about today. But with COVID-19, it's not too dissimilar. Once people have become government dependent, all the talking, the daily press briefings, have you seen the press briefing? Have you got the thing on Instagram, the image, and see how many people have got COVID today and all these things? We've had different pictures of vaccines, of ventilators, I said, of people queuing up in different situations of political dependence and dominance, such that even meeting a family member could become exciting to us, and we become maybe grateful to the government. Thank you, dearest Premier. You smile. Gosh, did I get worried when it became Happy Father's Day to the stepdaddy. And his face on the side of the cereal box. This is a serious issue of narcissism, but we're not here to talk about that. How's the government dominated its relationship with us? Because it has. It's bound our hands in many, many ways. For some teachers, it's failed to let them go in the classroom and do what they're passionate and damn good at, as well as nurses and doctors and other people too. Oh, we're not forcing you, we're just taking everything away until you consent. That's what's going on. Number 6, maintaining control. Once sexual abuse is occurring, the offender uses lots of secrecy, lots of blame to keep the child involved and silent, hence the taking away the voice. Children in these relationships face threats to blame them. They can end and to end the emotional material needs they associate with the relationship. So they keep quiet. They might feel the loss of the relationship and the consequences of exposing it will humiliate and render them rejected. So they just stay quiet and often stay in that situation. Is that where we're at as adults today? Blame the unvaxxed, withhold evidence underpinning decisions, make people face threats of having no income, no travel, no recreation, no going to the gym, no to the cinema, no to any of these basic freedoms that we've every right to. Increased familial and social rejection, and then demand that children are masked and vaccinated as well. Can you see the correlation? That's all I want you to do today. If that's all you get out of this, I think my job's well done at the beginning. How's the government maintaining control over us today? What's happening is it's now tied our legs, and we're totally in a place, or we should be, they want us to be, where we think they've done no wrong whatsoever. Saw this cartoon picture, image, a picture of somebody plugging chips into kids' arms. That chips went into their arms and they gave them energy, just as food once did in the past. Can you see the power of words and imagery that's used around us? This is exactly how abusive relations happen as well. What's going on beneath the surface? Well, there's unquestionably a war, and we're facing a battle. I'm a Christian, I believe this is a spiritual battle, but on an earthly level, it's also a battle against the World Health Authorities, World Economic Forum, United Nations, Therapeutic and Goods Association, global elites, governments, and as a Christian I put the word church as well. Because in many ways the church itself is complicit in this, without a question of doubt. The enemy basically wants us to get rid of our dignity in place of depravity, that we exchange somehow sanctity for shame. And that's what I think this pandemic's been all about. These are all what happens, these stages here in yellow is exactly what happens in abuse as well. Deflection. What happens is we learn to hate ourselves for being abused, but then we hate what's happened to us and those other people. But then it's happened to us and we said yes, so we go, but it must be me, I must be the one that's wrong here. And what happens is there becomes a division in society. It becomes an us and them. WA was never an us and them before 2020, was it? I don't remember that. Suddenly there's winners and suddenly there's losers. That's not healthy for any of us at any point. So what's happened is we've entered into the war zone. And that war zone is where you learn to cope or you justify the abuse. So who is or isn't free to leave their home can become part of that war zone itself. If you're leaving your home, why? Which buildings, public buildings, can you go into? Which ones can't you? We'll make that decision for you. But ultimately, the invisible damage that we rarely see is powerlessness, is what people experience. The abuse survivor experiences powerlessness. I'm seeing grown men heading up families who are now powerless, and they feel betrayed. And they've got an ambivalence. I wanted to do this out of love, but now I hate what I did. And they're learning now sometimes just to wear a mask and say, I've just got to live with it and suck it up. And that makes you perform, and it stops you from being true to who you really are. And that means that in many ways people have just accepted a total dependence on the government's instructions, even if they're bad, and even more so even if they're mad. But there is a way into freedom. That's why I use that word beyond in the title of my talk today. Oops. It's about honesty, repentance, and actually bold love. The damaging process. Remember we talked there were 6 stages, but in some way there's 6 layers that happens to our hearts and to our lives, and have been in this past couple of years. The first thing is, we've mentioned those words, depravity and shame. In some cases, many people have started to doubt who they are, and their ability, and their qualifications, and their future. And they've begun to say, maybe there's something wrong with me, and that's what shame does. It takes away your dignity and leaves you in a place of depravity. It's made you turn, for some people have turned on themselves saying, I hate what I've done, but I hate what they've done, And they've been left in this place of contempt, struggling between self-contempt, self-hatred, and other hatred. They felt powerless. They've gone on lots of marches, but felt in many ways, has this made any difference? They deeply feel betrayed. Those who are not vaccinated feel betrayed, that just by having principles and a conscience, they haven't been listened to. Those who are vaccinated feel that they gave their bodies over to something because they were promised this would keep everybody safe and it would be okay. And then we read 9 pages of small print of adverse effects of Pfizer jabs, the rest of it. And people start getting very worried. They feel betrayed. Then there's an ambivalence. I hate the government, but then they tell me it was my decision. And we fight between, well, who should we hate and who shouldn't we hate? And deep down we shouldn't hate anybody. And then people just wear a mask. And they get on with life. And we're expected to believe that everything's okay, and it's not. To the point where we ourselves, if we're not careful, we disappear. We lose a sense of who we are. Does the government care? I'm putting these 2 images because this is what I drive past all the way, often on the way home. I have nothing against Simone McGurk as a person. I want to make that very, very clear. I'm challenged by her as a Minister for Child Protection. And I really am. Because a number of abuse survivors drive past these bins and benches on the way to see me. And they see a Minister for Child Protection who, after numerous occasions I've asked to go and meet with her to say, look, we've got some real intelligence to show you how to deal with abuse here in WA. She doesn't want to know. Doesn't want to know. Not just that, but actually in the recent law of the changing of the Children and Community Services Amendment Act, many survivors wrote in and said, please can you safeguard the way in which we live out our religion in particular and find healing. The government totally ignored those requests. We're talking the most vulnerable in our society here. Do they care? I didn't say anything. Moving on a bit, the church says that getting COVID vaccines is an act of love. Charlie Brown here, maybe, but a forced act of love is called rape. And I deal with that on a daily basis, saying to people, did you say yes? They said, no, I didn't. I said, that's rape. That did not have your consent. Now, many of you might have seen this, and for the sake of time, I might rush through it really quickly. This is an email that came from a couple called Bob and Angie, but I loved it so much that I copied it. Some of you might have seen it, but it talks about the fact the church has turned a blind eye to those our own government are oppressing and forcing into poverty. They refuse to speak up for those who've been coerced, manipulated and blackmailed into taking a jab to keep their jobs. They fail to represent those whose conscience prohibits them from being defiled with the COVID vaccination. Any organisation that does this is not a powerful voice for those in need. They're a powerful voice for their own ends, and they should be called out for it. Our government and church leaders, in many cases, but not every case, have clearly failed us. We need to identify and expose that which is blatantly wrong, and we do need to be able to pray for them. And there is the COVID sign at St Mary's Cathedral, where it was used as a COVID clinic, as some of you might know. Regrettably, this is what happened. The church became sheeple. The church failed to roar like a lion. I take my hat off if I was wearing one. I take my invisible hat off to those of you who are here today to come and listen to these talks this time. But I chose that word beyond very deliberately. And I chose this image on the screen very deliberately. Because I stand here today being able to talk about sexual abuse without feeling any shame at all. And I love being in this body. You don't have to like it. I do. I live in it. But I do. I just love being me. And I've come from a state of being so dissociated and so hating myself. How did I get there? How do I seek to help others get there? Well, I don't want to get religious with you. I actually want to get relational with you. Freedom is an inside job, guys. We can look to governments and others as much as we like, but we have to take responsibility for ourselves. We've got to recognise that in some cases we have been layered with, the depravity and the shame and the powerlessness and the ambivalence and all these different things. It's possible to unlayer this stuff. God himself doesn't change, even though political leaders change and church leaders do change. Let me tell you, you can trust in God. I'm not asking you to become some great religious person. I'm just wanting to offer you an antidote to where our society's been the last couple of years. Governments and churches, we know, do abuse. But God actually exchanges our abuse. He says, give it to me, and I will give you back your own dignity. It's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. And we have to be gentle with ourselves and yet very deliberate. They say that a broken bone, when it's mending, that fracture site for a time is stronger than ever. And I want to say this journey of restoration for ourselves is painful. For our society it will be painful. But for a time we will gain strength, and we will know strength in the midst of it if we're willing to look at it. The time frame is your choice. We embark upon a journey like this when we're ready to do so. Don't let it be 22 years, which is the average time an abuse survivor takes to face their childhood sexual abuse. Too long, guys. It says in 1 Peter 2:24, this is the only bit of the Bible I'm going to quote, Jesus took all of our sins, all the rubbish that we picked up and been thrown at us and that we've done ourselves. He takes all of that and he lifts them into his body on the cross itself so that we can die to all the crap. That's what sin is, it's crap, it's killing us. So we can live in a right way, in the way that we should live. That by his wounds we have been healed. So the cross is waiting there for each and every one of us in the way that we need to access that. So Jesus was willing to lose his sight, to lose his hearing, to lose his voice, to lose the accessibility of his own arms and his legs, to give up everything so that we could get our lives back. And this is my last slide. We've just got to stay friends, regardless of your status. We've got to just walk with each other and remember that this is a great Southland to live in. It really is. It's a great place, a great city. That's the most important thing, that we stay friends. And just to let you know that in the future, I've got some overcoming abuse workshops that we're going to be putting on. Some specifically for abuse survivors. I'm just thinking of manipulating these for people who really feel abused by COVID, so that they can make their way out as well. It's really important that we take time for this. You might want to take a screenshot of this. This is my last shot, my last screenshot, whatever. And I just want to say thank you very much for being here, and I'll pass you back to Jenny. Thank you very much.